Super Hang-On is one of my most nostalgic Sega Mega Drive racing games, and I know that many of you guys will feel the same. It's a game I have very fond memories of playing as a kid. So why don't we take a look at the game's development history, and I'm going to share some thoughts about why I love it so much. The original Hang-On was released in the arcades in 1985 by Sega. It was developed by their AM2 division and designed by the legendary Yu Suzuki, the man behind a number of Sega's most loved 3D sprite scaling arcade games, including Space Harrier, Outrun and Afterburner. The game was revolutionary in terms of what it achieved. This was the first use of Sega's so-called superscaler technology, which essentially allowed pseudo 3D sprite scaling. This early form of texture mapping was a critical step in the progression towards the fully 3D games we love today, and Yu Suzuki's accomplishment should not be underestimated. Many of his arcade games achieved a great sense of speed and fluidity thanks to this technology. As though this wasn't innovative enough, the arcade game featured a motion-controlled motorbike which players could ride on. Again, this could be considered an early precursor to modern motion-controlled gaming, and another example of how this game was a trailblazer in so many ways. The first thing I noticed when I play this game is the fantastic sense of speed the engine creates. It almost feels as though you're on the cusp of losing control as rocks and billboards zip past in a blur. I can only imagine how exciting this was to play back in the mid-80s. The billboards are worth a mention actually, because they feature advertisements for Shell, Pirelli motorcycles and various brands of cigarettes, including Marlboro, which is clearly a play on Marlboro. I'm pretty sure people would have a thing to say about cigarette advertisements in games these days, but whatever, it was the 80s. Thanks to its success, the original game was ported to a number of home consoles, including the MSX and Sega Master System. The Master System version also came out in 1985 and was packaged with some new consoles. A lot of concessions had to be made to fit an arcade game onto an 8-bit system, but I've got to say, during the limited time I've spent with this game, I was pretty impressed. All of the essential elements are there, and, well, it feels like a Hang-On game for sure. You do have to manage a rather fiddly gear system though, which I found a little distracting, but for the most part it's very enjoyable. One thing I found both amusing and frustrating, however, was the fact that if you touch anything, whether it be a rock at the side of the road or another bike, you immediately explode, which I find to be a little bit overdramatic, not to mention a complete pain in the posterior. Anyway, I think it's worth a look if you're interested, as it's not a bad achievement at all for an 8-bit system. Super Hang-On, which was my first introduction to these games, came out in the arcades in 1987, and this is a truly superb game. All of the speed and fun from the original Hang-On is included, but now you have a choice of 4 stages to race on, and that beautiful, beautiful boost button. As though things weren't already fast enough, you could now activate a boost when you got up to 280 km per hour, causing fire to spew out of the exhaust and sending you off at the speed of light down the road. This mechanic, although it sounds simple, is part of the brilliance of this game. Leave it on for too long and you'll be flying off into those billboards in a flash, but play it too safe and don't use it enough, and you'll be struggling to get to the checkpoints in time. Mastering the timing of the boost then is pretty much one of the key skills in this game. The arcade cabs had several different versions, including a full tilt control bike, which I had the pleasure of playing at Play Expo a few years ago. I absolutely love that version of the game, and if you can find it, it's a real treat to have a go on. The other version, with the handlebars stuck to the cab, is a bit less exciting to be honest. Either way, if I find these cabs at a convention, I always have to have a go, because of just how fun they are to play. Again, this game was ported to a great number of systems, including the Amiga, the Atari ST and DOS, and I was amazed to find an incredibly limited port on the ZX Spectrum, which, if you ask me, looks and sounds terrible, but of course it was the Mega Drive version I fell in love with as a kid, and that's the version I'm going to focus on here. The Mega Drive port came out in 1989, and almost every friend who had a system had this game back in the day, and indeed, very few collections leave out this absolute classic now. The Mega Drive had a number of high quality arcade ports, but in my opinion this is one of the best, and the graphics are as close to the cab as possible given the hardware. The sense of speed is there, the sprites are bright and colourful, and the frame rate doesn't seem to suffer at all. I can well recall spending an afternoon watching my friend play this and feeling amazed at the 3D graphics back in the day. As I mentioned, the game features 4 courses, each of varying difficulty and length, with a simple aim of getting through the checkpoints in time. It sounds easy, but it's a fairly challenging game, and if I'm honest, I've only ever managed to beat the beginner stage, which is pretty pathetic, I'll admit. The gameplay isn't that dissimilar to Outrun in some ways. You've really got to get to that checkpoint in order to continue, and sometimes I find the time limits to be very tight indeed. Simple things like skidding off or touching another bike will cost you precious seconds, and it can be tough recovering after a mistake. Though at least you don't have a road rash style walk of shame back to your bike. Even so, I've always liked the bailing animations in this game. There's something entertaining about watching the driver skid across the dirt or go tumbling over his bike. The backgrounds look really nice too, and there's something relaxing about watching the hills or buildings off in the distance. As if the visuals weren't enough though, the music is one of the truly standout features of this game. Taking a leaf out of Outrun's book, you can choose one of 4 songs to blast on your voyage, and each one of them is superb and memorable. So good, in fact, the SST band's performance of Outrider Crisis is a video I watched time and time again on YouTube. This really is some of the best music you'll hear on a Mega Drive. It's recreated so well from the arcade version, just like every other aspect of this game. It just blows me away. One might even go so far as to say that the home console version is better than the arcade original, because of the addition of Mega Drive specific content here. If you choose original mode, you're treated to an entirely new campaign in which you must compete in a number of races against various rivals. If you beat them, you earn money from a sponsor, which you can use to upgrade your bike and repair damaged parts. This is a nice touch and adds a good amount of extra content to the cart, though I must say the arcade version is enough for me and I rarely bother with the campaign. I think the take-home message is that these games are loved for a reason, and this series was not only pioneering back in the day, but remains a great example of how to do arcade ports the right way. This game comes with the highest recommendation. If you don't have this in your collection, you really must go and rectify that as soon as possible. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this retrospective on Super Hang-On on the Sega Mega Drive. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Take care guys, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.